Hi, I'm Steve Hayes, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Stefan Hofmann. And together, he and I have been working on how to bring a different model to evidence-based care. And so this conversation is just a chat between two friends and colleagues about where the field's going and what we've been doing to try to help move the field in a positive direction. So, Stefan, I'm really happy that you're here to have a chat.
Well, yeah, thank you, Steve. Yeah, this is Stefan Hofmann. I'm at Boston University. I'm a professor of psychology, and I'm really delighted to join Steve in this endeavor. I think it's long overdue. It's a very important new development, I think, and we're excited to discuss that with you.
Yeah, no, thanks for mentioning your academic qualifications. I failed to, but I should probably say that I'm a professor at the University of Nevada. Well, so maybe one place to start might be the little article that we just wrote, and then we'll get into these bigger projects that we're doing. But we have this very short piece, but also very pithy piece. I'm actually kind of proud of it. It was a lot packed into 2 pages in the journal World Psychiatry, which just came out a few days ago, in which we basically put together several things. We look back at the whole third wave kind of issue. What did that really mean? We look at the contemporary changes that are going on in evidence-based care and in the research programs that NIMH and are funding, and just more broadly where the field is and where it's looking to go. And maybe a place to start would be for us just to chat about what was in that paper, because I think it will very naturally lead to how we went from, let's be honest, I think most people probably think of Hayes and Hofmann as some sort of wrestling match or cage fight. And indeed, we've had our quarrels.
Yes.
In the context of all that, have surprisingly come to see a lot of overlap in what we both care about. So, Stefan, would you be willing just to pull out a few of the things that you think are important in the short piece that's in World Psychiatry that just came out?
Sure. Yeah, and it's a as you said, it's a short piece, but I think it opens up a new way of thinking, or introduces people to a new way of thinking, I think. So I think, clinical psychology has come a long way, and cognitive behavior therapy is unquestionably one of the big success stories in psychotherapy research, no doubt about it. I think what has happened, though, over the years is that basically psychiatry gave us sort of the psychiatric categories to work with. This is depression, this is panic disorder, this is borderline personalities, or whatever they may be. And the idea was obviously to develop drugs, really, or biological interventions initially to cure the disease. And as CBT evolved, it sort of we and researchers have examined in randomized controlled trials different CBT strategies for all these different mental disorders as compared to often medication. But what it has led really us to is a very, very narrow path. We work within a sort of a latent disease DSM-defined model. And we have done very well as compared, psychiatry have given us these fairly arbitrarily defined diagnostic disorders. But obviously, I think we have come to a point where we need to rethink the way we make sense of the heterogeneity of human suffering, really.
I'm old enough to remember that transition. And I was actually sort of there when Jerry Clareman first said, you're not going to get funding from NIMH unless you go in this direction of protocols for syndromes. And at the time, behavioral therapy was, struggling with, but in really in a positive way, sort of challenged by how it is that we're going to take principles and create a kind of functional analysis. I think there were a lot of problems in those early efforts, but in a way, it looks to me like we're sort of going back to our roots.
Yeah.
And what's happening here. But I think with a change, I really want to be careful, because I've run into this over and over again. If you start challenging the kind of biomedicalization of human suffering, sometimes people will challenge you on the importance of biology. And these are two very different topics.
Absolutely.
Evidence-based care has to be fully integrated, in my opinion, and I think yours as well, with biology and all of its aspects.
Oh, absolutely.
We're part of life sciences. We belong there. We have to be responsible for the depth of our concepts. Nothing should be going on in the brain that contradicts what we are saying in our theories as to what's going on psychosocially and so forth. But the biomedical model, even within biology, hasn't always worked. I mean, cancer never progressed as long as all they were doing was listing the signs and symptoms of all these different botanized cancer. It wasn't until they started figuring out what the processes were that we really started getting some traction on how to, treat cancer when it occurred, rather than simply being able to label it as this special type or that special type. So we're going back to basics in a way, aren't we?
In a way, we are. I mean, we have examined that way back when we looked at functional behavioral analysis, trying to understand what context, what stimulus leads to what behavior response, and how they change, and and to understanding what basically the causal mechanism of something that links it back to processes. We somehow lost our way in as we embraced the DSM for better or worse, and sort of incorporated this latent disease model idea. We sort of lost track of our roots, really, of our what psychology can really contribute, what behavior scientists can contribute. And you're absolutely right. Biology is absolutely important. This is not at all to say that we want to dismiss genetics and biology and chemical processes that are absolutely essential. We cannot at the same time simply ignore functional relationships that are very essential, because once we understand the processes, that's what this will open up new ways of really identifying treatments that work, and also new way of identifying how to group people more meaningfully.
Well, one thing that's exciting about this shift back to process that I just want to mention, as we go back to basics, but we're not going back to where we started, because we're not going to simply take direct contingency principles, for example, and try to build an entire approach around that. We did that once. Direct contingency principles are very important. They're still on our lists of evidence-based therapies, things that are obviously linked to the animal learning part of our history as a tradition. But we're now going forward with a larger set of cognitive science and emotion science and neuroscience and modern, frankly, behavioral science, even behavior analysis, which is the wing that I'm out of. But the exciting thing about that isn't just that, oh boy, we get to geek out with all this new stuff. The people who are listening to this, who are practitioners, should know that what it gives us is the opportunity to be useful in a different way. I think many, many, many practitioners have wondered, why the heck are we going through these weeks of trying to figure out, is it this subsyndrome or that subsyndrome, when it's not going to make any difference to treatment? And oh, by the way, it hasn't been shown to increase the outcomes by going through that process. Whereas if you focus on moderators, it's important to outcome. That's what the research shows. If you focus on mediators, that's a functionally important pathway to change. And so it gives the practitioner a place to focus on processes that matter in terms of making initial treatment choices in the case of moderators, but also in terms of tracking progress in the case of mediators. And that's exactly what's not been in our protocol for syndrome era.
And I think this is also in line with a general zeitgeist that we are kind of now moving forward and beyond DSM and beyond diagnoses, and identifying what has become known as transdiagnostic mechanisms. There are a number of treatment protocols. David Barlow's unified protocol is a case in point. So trying to understand the processes that cut across many different problem areas. And this sort of leads us a bit away from these very arbitrary diagnostic categories, trying to understand what is it that we need to move, that we need to change for people to get better, and also not just to make them feel less bad, but also make them feel better in their lives, generally speaking. So there are a number of core processes that we think are important, and these core processes are outlined in the book.
Well, yeah, we should get to the book, but what you just mentioned there when you hesitated and say, not just the things that remove distress, one of the things that happens as we go back to a process-based focus is that some of these processes are known to lead to quality of life, prosperity, post-traumatic growth, etc. So we're not just shifting the topic, we're also shifting the goal in a way, because I think we're going back to the idea that we're going to be useful to people across the full range of what it is that they want help with. In the biomedicalization of suffering in this latent disease model, we kind of got stuck with a very negative focus, and you can see it even in the term transdiagnostic. I mean, that's not right. That's not the right term. I don't know what the term is going to be. We've struggled with that.
Yes.
Because transdiagnostic is far too narrow. That's just saying, okay, within these slices that are in the DSM, I can deal with 2 or 3 chunks. No.
Well, we think the word will be process-based therapies eventually.
Well, we suggest, and maybe we mentioned in the article, we talk about process-based therapy, process-based CBT. In the long run, maybe even CBT is too narrow. Maybe it's just process-based therapy, as we mentioned in the World Psychiatry article. When I do trainings in ACT, I call it process-based ACT, because I think it's always been process-based, but it's just easier to actually teach it with sophistication, to teach it that way instead of teaching it as a protocol, because it applies to too many things. Which protocol are you going to pick? I can't pick the smoking protocol to teach people work with depression, but I can take the underlying model, get the focus on the processes, how you move that, and then you can deal with the specifics in a particular problem area. And it looks like that's where we're headed across the field now.
What I also think is exciting about the project that we are working on is that it really links practice and theory very tightly together, and we have actually in the first section we talk about in philosophy and what the theoretical underpinnings are, and then we very concretely link the mechanisms to the specific techniques that we think are important to target the mechanism.
Yeah, let's jump into the book, because we haven't really laid that out for the listeners yet. You and I have produced a textbook, which is, I think, will be useful to practitioners, but was designed also in training with graduate students who are learning about psychotherapy and behavioral intervention. And we're calling it process-based CBT. And what you were talking about is in the initial part of the book, we really kind of lay out the theoretical and foundational kinds of issues that are involved. And then we go through these domains where the processes come out. And then finally, sort of process by process, walking through how you can use these principles when dealing with people. I think it's fair to say it's an evolutionary book, not a revolutionary book, because we have to move one step at a time. And so people will still recognize their field and themselves and what they already know how to do and so forth in there, but with a clear movement. And I'm kind of excited about it. One of the things we did is we based it on a consensus document that was produced by ABCT with many, many, many other societies involved. I know the ACBS folks were involved. I know the cognitive therapy group was involved. And that consensus document kind of laid out some things, saying we're going to have to focus more on theory and principles. We have to get clear about our philosophy of science, what our assumptions are, and things even down at that level. And they're all in the book.
And if I could also just intersect, I think we spent quite a bit of time thinking about the term CBT, or should we call it CBT? Should we? And I think we agree that CBT is an umbrella term that is not narrowly defined. We don't identify it with any particular CBT protocol for depression or anxiety, but rather CBT as could be synonymous as evidence-based therapies, but CBT has become known as, and most people would know what we mean if we use the term CBT. But there might be a time when we change that terminology. But for now, we feel comfortable sticking to the term process-based CBT.
Yeah. So PBCBT, you could see eventually maybe just become PBT. As you bring in the Fonagy's of the world and things like that, they may be uncomfortable, because one of the things that's cool about this focus on process, once you do that, all these big walls that are between these different traditions, these little schools and et cetera, they come down.
Yeah. And
then, well, why not? I mean, why not draw from these different things? And that is something I think the third wave contributed. I think we had to focus on these issues of philosophy of science. We had to focus on process. And it wasn't in combination with bringing things like acceptance and mindfulness and values and some of these things from our wisdom traditions, and the things from meditation and yoga and all these kind of fruit nut seed mix of things that are out there. Turns out some of those things, even though they weren't randomized controlled trial kind of evidence-based care models, they had some ideas about processes that were important. The humanistic traditions, has acceptance in there. It has a values focus in there. It didn't have the science to really link it up. And so what's happened, I think, if you look back, which is what that little piece in World Psychiatry is, and then look forward, which is the text that we're doing, I think you can see that the third wave kind of opened up this process-based focus in such a way that it's now open to basically any evidence-based process from any tradition, whether it's analytic, existential, humanistic, it doesn't matter. And we can play together with different words for the same things. Let's face it, people are going to call the same thing different ways. Okay, that's fine. And with different models, when you collect them, and that's important, we'll work that out. But without this kind of not invented here kind of problem, they made it hard for practitioners to use things that were useful, but that had not been, gone through the right vetting in terms of the particular school or tradition.
And in a way, we are inviting more or less everybody in there, in our tent, as long as you can tell us what you think, what the process is, and do you have evidence to support the process. So not any strategy that seems to work, but for no good reason, or just for some reason that we can't really quantify. Well, this is not enough. We really need to understand the mechanism, the process, and that advances theory. That advances then further development of psychological therapies later on.
Well, and I think one of the things that science can do is it has a way of eliminating things that are unnecessary kind of hangers-on. So if you take something like Buddhism, let's say, I don't like the folks who are saying Buddhism is a science. No, it isn't. It is not. Yes, it's empirical, but so is baking bread. It doesn't make bakers scientists. But with respect, we look carefully at what wisdom traditions, including Buddhism, but also all the others, all the other major wisdom traditions, religious traditions have the same kind of quality. But then some of these concepts, turns out, will work as scientific processes when they're reformulated and tested, and some of them won't. And so we can treat this human complexity and what we know about it with respect, but with no genuflection. We still have our role to play as Western scientists, but allowing the data to do the wheat from the chaff kind of filtering, rather than our particular analytic biases or theoretical presuppositions. Let's let the data decide. And if you want to play and you can show that your processes, for example, mediate important outcomes, you're in.
Yeah. So this is sort of the commonality. This is the common thread that we want to, the basis that we want people to work with is process. What are the process? And there are different levels. I mean, we haven't gotten to that level of depth. There might be biological more in nature, more psychological in nature, more behavioral in nature. But let's open it up to those kind of discussions. I think this is the beginning of a longer process that will evolve. So this is not our book or our thinking is not the end state at all. These are sort of initial first steps toward a ever evolving scientific discipline of psychological science, really, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the book on process-based CBT is a very important step forward, but I think listeners and viewers should know that we have a whole series of projects to sort of build out this vision of process-based CBT and process-based evidence-based care more generally. So we held a conference in Boston, where we brought a number of really world-class experts together to look at the issue of how are we going to go to issues of diagnosis and case formulation and functional analysis, these really important things. It's actually something that's not in our textbook on PB-CBT, because we thought it would just expand it too much to get into the assessment and diagnosis side of it. And so we had a problem focus, but we didn't go much beyond that. But we knew that other shoe had to hit the ground, and we're now going through the process of producing an edited volume. Exactly what we'll title it, I don't know, but we have a world-class list of authors there. I wonder if you have some thoughts about the Boston conference and just what you see as went on there that was of importance that might.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think as you said, I think once we start considering the problem. So rather than approaching it as a medical disease model, but and once we step away from it, not to say that there's no latent disease, there may or may not be, but let's assume that some problems are not expressions of a latent disease, and once we step away from it and kind of think about processes that are involved in treatment, a number of questions come up quite naturally, and a very natural question is, well, how else could we? What could we use to classify people if we don't have these arbitrary diagnostic categories formed by the DSM? By the way, we had people who also presented this point of view. Then we considered other viewpoints. One was represented by NIMH, who a representative came who presented on RDoC, the research domain criteria, which was for a while a very prominent system that is now sort of a bit falling out of favor. We had a number of folks looking at from behavioral points of views, from a biological point of view. So a number of, so I think we have to, once you open it up, then I guess the tough question, these are difficult answers to these questions. What can we use to group people more meaningfully? But I think this book will not so much give a solution, but lays out sort of the problem space from which we can then elaborate and explore possible answers, I guess.
And I think there were some themes. There were a lot of different angles that people brought in, but there were some themes and actually a kind of a progressive way forward that you and I now have a project going on that links to it even beyond that. But some of the themes I saw in there were the individual really matters.
Mm-hmm.
The individual meaning what you're working with. It could be a couple, it could be a family, it wouldn't necessarily the individual, but the individual matters. And we have analytic tools now that we didn't have 25, 30 years ago when we were trying to figure out how to do functional analysis, for example, with just check contingency principles. We have statistical and other analytic tools, dynamical systems and the ability to sort of use statistical models that don't require that things don't have any autocorrelation and goofy things that don't make any sense in the context of the individual, where you can see, for example, I kind of like that cool finding that Delhaize has emphasized, where you get this little spike when you're doing CBT for depression, mm-hmm. where people get worse after a little while and then they get better. And that spike actually is a tell. It's a tell of something good happening there. I've seen it in the ACT literature too. And that's really just kind of, but you have to look with many slices within the individual. So it brings back some echoes and maybe even some analytic methods from the days of single case experimental designs, time series designs. Another one is context, never thinking of processes as just a thing, but it's a thing that has a function, and the function relates to context in terms of time and situation. I thought that was really important as well. And we saw that across. Another one, I think maybe was the multidimensionality of it. These are systems, and you have to perturbate a system to change a system. Yeah. The system includes many elements at times. So the cognitive element, emotional element, biological element, things that will come in like sleep and nutrition and things we're not used to thinking about, frankly, as psychotherapists. Could end up being very important in trying to understand how we intervene. So it isn't just chaos. It isn't just now for something completely different. We're building on that previous era and we're going back to some of the earlier ones, but we're also taking advantage of some very new analytic methods and theoretical ideas.
Interestingly, you mentioned chaos. Some of the methods come from chaos theory that have now been applied. It's complex network analysis that we also discussed in that regard. And by the way, we don't just limit ourselves in this discussion to psychological processes, as important as they are, but also, biological and neuroscience methods. They're very critical. And I think neuroscientists are really our friends. We need to really listen to them. They are listening a lot to us. Yeah. We need to find ways to link that. Also geneticists as well. So. Yeah.
I'm very excited about what's going on with epigenetics. And
yes, you did a lot of work on epigenetics. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Very clear evidence that, for example, part of how trauma works, let's say, is an actual up and down regulation of genes that are expressed over months and years and decades, but that these things can actually change, and you can measure them. You can look at the methylation of cytosines, et cetera, and you can actually see that's just one of many epigenetic mechanisms. You can see that psychotherapy changes these things, and that opens up a whole nother way to interact with our friends in the biological sciences and psychiatry and so forth. We had some evidence presented even at the Boston conference of how some of the things that we've been dealing with psychologically, can be understood in terms of endophenotypes genetically and sort of the impact of epigenetic mechanisms. So I think we're into a new era where we can get everybody on the same page, and the behavioral sciences have a very important role now, because you start seeing, biology as a way of turning, environment and behavior into structure. And we've evolved in such a way to do that. As we understand that better, we'll be able to intervene on the psychological side. Who knows, maybe with new medications, et cetera, that opens up those possibilities too. And work together with a process-based model. One of the things that, excuse me, go ahead. No,
just to comment, I think the some of some of our friends will probably be shocked, those who are coming from a behavioral tradition, that we are so favorably, biased toward neuroscience. And I think that it has often been used as sort of the enemy of the field, neuroscience and also psychiatry and pharmacology. Well, we need to listen to what they offer and what they have to say. And certainly neuroscientific findings are very much in line with many of our theories and also our treatments. So we need to break down those walls and those boundaries and find ways to work together more closely.
Well, back in to the book we're doing, the process-based CBT book, we've got a wonderful little piece in there on neuroscience that
Yes.
is quite different.
Yes.
Produced by Jim Cohen and Greg.
Greg Siegel.
What's really exciting about it is these are kind of contextual neuroscience. They're looking at the brain as in part a dependent variable, not an independent variable. And there's sometimes when we get cattywampus on that, and the same thing happens with genetics, you start thinking of behavior as just an expression of, well, that's not true, because behavior works back. And what that chapter does is it goes through some of the major processes that are talked about in the book, and then looks back and says, okay, so how do these processes, when they're occurring, impact on the brain? What do we see going on there? And so we have these double-headed arrow kind of thing where it's a very exciting opportunity, for example, to do the kind of things that you've done in your research, where you look at, what are the changes in the brain that indicate, that we're heading in the right direction, or what are some of the processes in the brain that might moderate response to treatment? Well, there we're back on the same page again. Moderation, mediation, just dimensions and levels of analysis, that's fine. All of them get to play, all dimensions, all levels, but always held to account of, as an applied science, what does it tell us about who needs what, and about what the processes of change are that produce those outcomes functionally.
And this really moves toward personalized medicine, really. So you brought it up already with looking at the individual. We need to understand how something works in one single person, in one single individual. I mean, in a way, Skinner has really never thought much of pulling everything in one sample and then looking at means and standard deviations. Skinner always looked at the individual, right? I mean, you're a Skinnerian, I'm not, but that's what he did, right? He looked at the effect and to cause in one single organism that then clarifies mechanisms, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And our friend and colleague Dave Barlow, sang that song early on. You're not the only one; many did. That the mean may not represent anyone. Maybe no one that the entire pool looked like that, and yet that's the level of analysis we're going to be stuck at. It doesn't make sense, because that collective. Yes, we have to get to nomothetic principles, absolutely. But we dare not lose contact with the level of analysis at which we actually work. So, for example, we've got a very interesting chapter that will be in the Boston conference from our colleague at Berkeley, Fisher,
yes.
Who walks through how to apply. It's about a 30-day period where he's collecting many, many, many measures. I think I did the math. It's about 1,200 data points. But they're just little one-item measures done repeatedly, and you start looking at what are the kind of functions within that individual's actual experience, and then start making some predictions, drawing out elements and components out of the unified protocol. Okay, based on that, maybe we should give that one first. Maybe on that, give that one first. And sure enough, if you do that statistically, that's different than if you just get some expert clinicians and say, do this. So we may be able to go to something like a functional analytic model that's actually algorithmic and avoid some of these problems that we have of the art of functional analysis. We have to get beyond that.
And in fact,
whenever we have the art of, you've got error. And it's fine as a start, but mature sciences go beyond the art of.
Absolutely.
And functional analysis can't be an art; it has to be a science.
And we have the often what the criticism that you often get is, well, this is too complicated and not feasible, not doable. But in fact, it really is within reach. Smart phone technology, ecological monetary assessment, everything is moving toward big data, not only for a lot of people, but also within one person. We can then, predict catastrophic events happening right before they happen through complex network analysis. People have already shown that using complex network analysis, you can actually predict when a person is about to have a depression or a depressive episode or about to have a schizophrenic break. So this is very exciting. You can also use it to predict, obviously, recovery, relapse, and you can tailor then treatment to a specific case when you understand how the system changes.
No, I think it's an exciting, I think people have that sense of, oh, it's so complicated. Part of that is just a sense that this is new.
Yeah.
It has echoes in our history. It isn't that new, like, a complete shift for the field. It's carrying the field forward, but it really is a different direction. I think this process-based therapy, process-based CBT, as you build out the elements, how are we going to actually then assess what is functional analysis going to look like? What are our treatment protocols going to look like? They can't be linear, one-size-fits-all protocols. They're going to have to be protocols that link to processes and have procedures. I mean, the sentence that uses, evidence-based processes linked to evidence-based procedures that ameliorate the problems and promote the prosperity of people. That model is new. We didn't have the elements in place to do it 30 years ago. And in part because of what we did in this syndromal era, we learned a lot of things, good, bad, and different. We have a lot of things we gained, but there's also some dead ends we explored. So one of the things we've gained, I think, and this is, speaking with a little bit of pride about the ACT community, we've focused more on mediation and components, I think, than most. And so we've been able to do some meta-analyses around that. But the whole field now is moving in this direction. And you and I are involved in a project right now with some of our colleagues at Australian Catholic University to look at, I'll just describe this crazy project just for people, but not in detail, where we're looking at every single successful mediator that's ever been shown for a behavioral intervention or psychotherapy method so that we can find. And we're filtering 28,000 initial. We did this gigantic search of 28,000 initial articles, and we're going to chew through it and find out every single one that's successful. And then back to the spirit, of the, if you can show that you have a successful mediation, you've got processes that are functionally important by the standards we expect statistically, and how you do careful mediation analysis, not by just a claim. You're in, and we'll see how many we end up with. My prediction, I would guess we'll end up with 300 studies. What would you guess out of 28,000?
Well, I'm not sure. We should maybe come up with a little game, and whoever gets it.
Yeah, whoever gets it, I'll have to buy you a beer.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
I think it'd be more than 300 or less.
I think it would be more than 300.
I think it'd be more. Okay. So I'll pay off with a beer if it's more. But we're finding things like people saying, "Oh, the brain mediated," and all they mean is they had an appeal to the brain. There was no actual formal statistical test of mediation and so forth. But part of the spirit of it, going back to what a process-based era might look like, just the very fact that we're doing a project like this that's that Catholic, just anything, kind of, I think, gives us an early indication of how this might unfold. Is that tear down the walls, look at the processes, hang on to function. Now, we do have a problem then of how do you put these into models?
Oh, of course.
Because if let's say we end up, say your prediction works out and we've got 400, we probably have 120 different mediators at that point. I'm just guessing.
And that's where theory comes in.
You
That's
gotta have theory.
that's where we have to have different theories compete with one another and explain this mess.
Yeah, but that's what they have to explain. That's the chunk. That's the grouping. And if you only explain part of it, bad on you.
Yeah.
I mean, your theories have to be big enough, but if you can't do it precisely, if you can't say specifically why this measure of cognitive reappraisal, or that measure of emotional regulation, why that functioned inside your theory, so you don't have that precision, you don't have that scope, bad on you. And that gives us a target for our theories. We've had, I think, a tendency for anything that you can argue theoretically or as a model, and then you bring some evidence in on it, applies. But then how about the evidence that it doesn't handle?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is a point inside these kind of disconfirmatory evidence, not just confirmatory evidence. And you look at how we test our theories, we fall into this cognitive error over and over again of just going out and looking for confirmation.
Yeah.
And an example might be, let's say we have the 120 different terms that are in the 400, could be more, studies that we end up with. If your theory only touches, let's say, 30 of them, you will never know that unless you have a body here and a challenge. This is what you have to explain. So I think it opens up a really wonderful kind of era of theory held to account to a body of evidence. So we have an empirical way of testing our theories beyond just confirmation. Confirmation's not enough. You have to look at the breadth and the strength of the practical impact.
I think it's also important because we finally reach a state where we develop and test theories based on empirical evidence, which we really have had. We have actually data to test our theories rather than coming up with some neat little ideas that everybody can come up with.
In this project, we're going to try out something that I'd propose we'll see to see, could we fit these mediators into the core ideas inside an evolutionary way of thinking of mediators that are focused on variation, emotional variation, cognitive variation, behavioral variation. Mediators that are focused on context sensitivity. Can you notice what the environment is doing? Can you notice what's going on within? Mediators that are focused on, how do you select out the variants that are of importance, values, work, things like that, or how you work to retain that, behavioral practice, things like that. And also levels of selection, the importance of social context, social support, relationships, the therapeutic relationship, and all of that, in being able to, select, successfully come up with new ways that can be put into your repertoire at the level of the individual. That's part of a larger social context. Absolutely. And we'll see whether or not that can do it. We kind of, guess that maybe it can. And if it can't, that's fine. If it can, that gives us another way to go forward that in a way simplifies, which would say, if you have a theory that you think can accommodate to this body of evidence, do be thinking also about, yes, how does that fit with the brain? Yes, how does that fit with learning processes? But yes, how does that just fit with what we know about how systems evolve? Because in all the other areas of life sciences, you have to do that. You can't say that this brain structure just happened. You have to think about, how did it evolve? I think the same thing will eventually be true when we think about the developmental trends within the lifetime of the individual, the cultural trends that surround it, and so forth, the things we're used to in psychosocial models. We'll see, but that's a thing we're gonna test. Well, I think people can sense the sort of sense of excitement and collegiality. Yes. I mean, that we've become good friends, but also good colleagues. Yes. In taking our differences and turning them into, a really positive opportunity for growth of the things that we care about, but the field more generally. That's right. And maybe that's worth just a couple of minutes on that, about the personal journey that we've been on. We'll have to go back and pick up.
Call from Atlanta, GA.
Yeah, I forgot to disconnect.
Busy man.
Home Depot delaying me know that a freaking door knock showing up. It's the 5th call or text on the last day. I made the mistake of saying, yes, update my orders. So let's just pause for a second. Hope they don't call right back.
Yeah.
And I don't know any way to turn that off.
It's all right.
Well, yeah, we can deal with it.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
So let me see if I can give something that John can hook into in post-production. So maybe this is a place to talk a little bit about our personal journey, because people, I think, can see the excitement that we have as colleagues work on this. And I think people know a bit about our history, and maybe a little surprised that we're able to work together. But not so much just on the personal side, but also in what it means professionally. I think we've learned something in this very process, and I think it actually has ended up, enriching what it is that we're looking at and the things that we've been sharing here in the discussion. You have some thoughts about that, about why we're working together effectively on these things?
Well, I don't think one can grow and sort of move on without having some people that you have some friction with, and sort of having sort of edging on certain ideas. And I think our friendship has given me sort of a very unique opportunity to really challenge some core beliefs that, no pun intended now, core beliefs as a cognitive therapist that I've had, and also kind of very fundamental questions that came up. That well, I'm not saying that you're, and I've never said it, that you're right, as you know. But,
I'm waiting for that day.
However, it forces you to re-examine your own position. And if I just talk to people who are in line with what I think, I can't possibly advance. But so clearly you have challenged me, and I enjoy that. Our intellectual wrestling matches have been highlight in my career, and still are. And now we're not wrestling that much anymore, but rather we are working together to really wrestle with the field, really, if you will. We're now, I think, our combined forces to change the field as we know it. I think both of us have this very modest goal. But I think I also sense.
Megalomaniacs or something.
I mean, you have also quite simply become a really close friend. So I respect you as a person, but in addition to that, I really thrive on your intellectual sort of and energy that you have. It's contagious, and I'm totally up for getting infected by you. I've been moving along here.
Well, this. I do think there's a lesson in here, and it's impacted on me as well, which is, bridges are a lot stronger than fences. They just are. They do more over time in terms of deflecting and changing the history of what goes on. I think if we take what we're doing of really looking at our assumptions, we don't necessarily have to have the same assumptions. We just appreciate that we have different assumptions. Looking at our different theories, we don't have to have the same theories. Just appreciate what are our theories trying to do. Remembering, this can be extended out. And I do think that it's not just an attempt to, have an Alice in Wonderland world where everybody gets to win. That we say, no, the analytic people might have something to say. The existential people, the humanistic people might have the neuroscientists have something to say. The geneticists and epigenetics. Well, the spirit that's inside that you and I have been exploring is one of mutual respect that turns into friendship often, which is just wonderful. Then you can have so much fun working. But if our field can get that kind of quality to it, here we have the behavioral therapy tradition, the cognitive behavior therapy tradition, had all these elements. It has behavior analysis in it, behavior modification. It has traditional behavior therapy. It has cognitive science, emotion science, cognitive therapy. And instead of that being a problem, which it often be turned into one, like who's right, it turns into an opportunity. And then that can be scaled. I mean, that opportunity taken advantage of can be scaled. I think what you and I are doing are kind of working out a kind of template that I hope the whole field takes seriously, which is, be careful about how you treat your enemies. They may become your best friends. It's a good lesson learned.
And just to add one other piece, I don't think either of us are. I don't think we want to sort of establish a new fashion, a new treatment modality, etc. I don't sense that from you, and I certainly don't. I think we're standing really on the shoulders of giants, and in a way, yeah, I was trained in the Beckian tradition, and he's still a very close friend and mentor to me. So, and he really very much opened up the scientific discussion, and he's very curious how we pursue this endeavor, this kind of enterprise. So I think this project is not to come up with another new thing that people pay a lot of money to get.
Yet another trademark therapy.
That's not what we want. We want to move the field forward.
Yeah, and the last thing we need is another trademark therapy.
Yeah.
And people should know, and I do want to say, the ACT folks from the beginning have walled that off. We actually prohibit people from certifying therapists and so forth if you want to be part of the recognized trainers list, because so it made it a lot easier for us. But in terms of where we're going, if we are able to keep our eye on these processes, there will be new models that emerge. There'll be new techniques that emerge. It's okay if people collect those and have a particular place where they train to excellence and all of that. But we're not running in there trying to invent the new thing. What we're trying to do is change the conversation about what is even the quality of evidence that we want with it. And there's many things we've left behind. When you get a process-based focus, you realize there's vast amounts that we need to know about how to measure and how to collect and how to produce those theories. And we went too far and just randomized controlled trials for protocols linked to syndromes. Our progress was too slow. And
we need to change the paradigm. We have to change the paradigm.
And the practical part of it, I want to keep an eye on as well. Part of what you and I are working on as well is trying to recruit some books that have this very practical focus of process, and yet take a little bite out of it so it doesn't overwhelm the person. Not to come up with yet another named therapy.
That's right.
But here's a bite, here's a bite, here's a bite, and we can kind of bring these things together when we apply them to the individual. So we're going to have to figure out a way to make this very practical. I mean, I could imagine very, soon kind of how to do a process-based therapy kind of book, but it wouldn't be sort of how to live inside this set of techniques book. It would be something more about how to take advantage of what's known about processes and procedures to fit it to the needs of people. And that's something, frankly, that practitioners have wanted from science from the beginning. Mm-hmm. It's just that we haven't been able to deliver it. And time's up. We have to really start focusing on this new way forward. Well, I think we had a great conversation here. Is there any concluding comments that you want to put on the table, Stefan?
Well, I think I hope we people will have an open mind and take a look at what we offer, and don't be that they're not too sort of distrusting, and just keep an open mind, see what we have to say, and I think I'm very excited. I'm convinced this is the way forward. I think you are too, and let's just give it a chance, and I think we can really have a huge impact, positive impact on human suffering.
Yeah, I think my kind of concluding thing would be for people to step back from where we are and kind of look again at where we need to move forward and consider just the possibility that really a process-based focus gives us a progressive way forward that sort of takes advantage of the best of our field, because there's some huge challenges going forward that are kind of wonderful, fun, empirical science and practical challenges. I do hope people buy the process-based CBT book and use it as a text. I'm sorry if it sounds like a commercial, but I think they'll find we're trying to make it practical. We're actually producing videos for the processes and getting some experts to show students, how to target it and how to change these things, so that we're not just lost in, some sort of abstract, very geeky self-stimulation process. This is, it's conceptual and methodological and all of that, but it comes down to very practical things.
In fact, we would like clinical programs to adopt it and to teach trainees and doctoral students in these processes.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have to start lifting the burden of actually how to do some of those trainings. We're going to start in May in Germany.
That's right. That's right.
Workshop together on process-based CBT, and we'll see where that goes. But it's going to be a much, much broader community as people realize this, and I think people are already moving that direction. This is kind of pointing to, I don't want to say the word wave, but I'll say it, to a wave that's happening already. I'm not going to write fourth wave. You can't make me do it. That's happening already in the field.
Starting again.
If we can position ourselves, we as a field, I think we're going to have an exciting ride over the next decade.
It's been fun.
Stefan, I enjoyed this thoroughly, and I hope the people who are watching and listening did as well. And
it's been fun. Thank you. Yes, as always. Thank you.